Under 3 things the earth trembles, under 4 it cannot bear up. A slave when he becomes king, a fool when he's filled with food, an unloved woman when she gets a husband, and a maidservant when she displaces her mistress. Yes, that's what we're looking at today. We're looking at Proverbs 30:21 through 23. And this is what Agar can't stand. So the following is a list of 4 things that causes the earth to tremble and under which it cannot bear up. There are things that happen that create things or situations that are just intolerable. Wisdom warns us against these things. This stands as a warning. First is a slave who becomes a king. This is about a person who is untrained and unskilled and all of a sudden gets a promotion. It's not saying like, well, those who are slaves should never be able to work their way up. It's not talking about some kind of caste system or something like that. It's saying those who are not trained, those who are not ready for this responsibility, then gets thrown into it. So you might have some bosses that this proverb applied to, right? For whatever reason, the person is in a position that they're just not qualified for. They're unable or unwilling to rise to the occasion, and that makes for an intolerable situation, especially for those under the new king, right? There is wisdom in delaying putting a person in power. David was anointed king as a young man before he even killed Goliath. But God didn't allow him to assume power until many years later. And he struggled with the power. But it didn't happen right away. So, because he was just a shepherd boy. Now he had done great things, right? As shepherding, he was a great shepherd, but he wasn't ready to lead the nation. So, there is that idea that you should delay that. And so there is that. It can become intolerable if you have someone who just doesn't know what they're doing in the position of power, especially as a king. You know, if you have a slave that rises to king and then the slave's not ready to take that role, that job, that authority, then you got a problem. So that can become intolerable. The next thing is, he says, a fool who is full of food. As Proverbs 13:25 says, the righteous has enough to satisfy his appetite, but the belly of the wicked suffers want. So the normal state is what I'm trying to say. The normal state of the fool is want and hunger. He is always wanting more. But when he does happen to find fullness, when he has a full stomach, then the earth groans because the fool becomes insufferable, right? While the fool has what he wants, at least for a while, no one can stand him. He does even more harm to himself and others. So a fool is normally hungry, but if he happens to come along if he happens to become satisfied for a certain amount of time, then it is intolerable. It's an intolerable situation. Think about Nabal. Consider Nabal, whose name is literally the fool. When he was feasting with his sheep shearers, right? Here's the fool getting full of food. This is literally the fulfillment of this proverb. Nabal was full of food, and when David asked Nabal for some hospitality for him and his armed men, Nabal mocked David and refused. This almost caused the death of his entire household, but for the discernment of Abigail, his wife. And so you have this idea here, like the fool who's satisfied is insufferable, is intolerable. So the fool is better when he's in want. If you're not giving the fool what he needs or what he wants, then you're doing better, right? You're doing okay. But as soon as the fool gets what he wants, then he's just intolerable. You can't stand him. And he's causing all kinds of problems, like Nabal. The next example is an unloved woman gets a husband. If read incorrectly, this sounds like a good thing. Well, isn't that good? If a woman is unloved and she finally has a husband, that's good, right? So what's so bad about that? But the language suggests that this is a woman who has been unmarried for a long time, perhaps because of her own behavior, and eventually gets married. She then holds it against other unmarried singles and is worse than when she was unmarried. So if she is insufferable before, and then this unsufferable woman gets married, then it's even worse. So she's going to lord it over people. This reminds me of the competition and really the meanness displayed between Leah and Rachel as they fought each other. You look at Genesis chapter 29. This behavior most likely started before they were married, right? They were probably insufferable towards each other before they got married. It wasn't just because they got married, right? Unfortunately, he was married to the same woman. But George Lawson said, "Women of meek and quiet spirits are a lovely part of the human race, but women of fretful spirits and unbridled passions are odious. When they are married, it would require all the patience of Job and the meekness of Moses to bear with them. Before marriage, their pride was checked by neglect and covered with the mantle of prudence. But when they come into their new state of life, they throw off every restraint, and their new situation is a means of increasing their vanity and ill nature, until neither their until neither their neighbors, nor their servants, nor their husbands can endure them." So that's what he's saying. So that's the idea. This unloved woman who was unloved before, but now is loved, or at least has a husband. It doesn't say that she's loved, but at least she has a husband. Now becomes this intolerable because now she thinks she's better than people. All right, so the next one is maid displaces her mistress. So this phrase has been seen a couple different ways. Some say that this is talking about a servant who, by some circumstance outside of her control, perhaps even the mistress dying and leaving her money, has now surpassed the prestige or wealth of her mistress, and then lords it over her new, or does not acknowledge her mistress' hand in her new position. That would be intolerable, especially if she got the money from the mistress. That would be wrong. Or this could be talking about a servant who has stolen the attention of the mistress's husband, which obviously is wrong. This would be something like how Abraham's attention was drawn away from Sarah to Hagar because of the birth of Ishmael, right? His heart was being drawn away from Sarah because now he has Ishmael, and Ishmael came from Hagar. And so it became intolerable for Sarah. She was jealous, and she ended up telling Abraham, "You need to kick her out." And God said, "Yeah, that's true. You need to kick her out." But that was an intolerable situation. Why? Because the mistress exceeded, the maidservant exceeded the mistress, and that caused problems. So you see here, wisdom is telling us that there are things that we need to watch out for. These things are intolerable. These are things that causes earthquakes, right, in life quakes. I saw someone talking about, "I have a life quake." Like, what does that mean? But that's the idea. Things that just become intolerable, things that just mess up life, that just destroy everything. So watch out for those. And then the one previous where he was talking about things he doesn't understand, like how can people get away with this? How can an adulteress do the things that she does and then get away with it? It doesn't make any sense, or at least apparently get away with it, right? For a time, we know ultimately she won't, but why is that happening? So that is something we need to ponder, those proverbs there. So come back next time and we'll conclude our study for the week.